lovely. Welcome to another interesting and exciting class. Today, we are going to be looking at Jesus' power over natural forces. Jesus' power over natural forces. We are going to look at instances Jesus demonstrated power over natural forces. Jesus used the stories to tell us that he has power over natural forces and there is nothing impossible for him to do. Now let's look at instances Jesus demonstrated power over natural forces. 1. Jesus calms the storm, feeding the 5,000. Jesus turns water into wine, and the great catch of fish. But in this class, we are going to look at Jesus calms the storm and the feeding of the 5,000. Jesus calms the storm. One evening, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let's go to the other side of the lake." This was after he had just spoken to the crowd about the kingdom of God through stories that are called parables. Then they left the crowd behind and they took him along in a boat, and Jesus was sleeping. You can see Jesus in the boat and he was sleeping. Thereafter, a wide storm came up and the waves crashed over the boat. It was about to sink. Then the disciples ran to Jesus and they woke him up. They said, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" And Jesus got up and he ordered the storm to stop. He says to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down and it was completely calm. And he said to his disciples, "Why are you afraid? Don't you have any faith at all yet?" They were terrified and they asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wave and wind obey him." That was how Jesus calms the storm. Now, we are going to look at another instance to show that Jesus has power over natural forces. We'll look at the feeding of the 5,000. Jesus looked up and saw a crowd coming towards him. So he said to Philip, "Where can we buy bread for these people to eat?" Philip answered and said, 8 months' pay would not buy enough bread for each one to have a bite. And another of his disciples spoke up and he said, "Here is a boy with 5 loaves of bread. He also has 2 small fish. But how far will that go in such a crowd?" And Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There were plenty of grass in that place and they sat down. Then the number of men among them was about 5,000. Then Jesus took the loaves and gave thanks. He handed out the bread to those who were seated, and he gave them as much as they wanted. And he did the same thing with the fish. When all of them had enough to eat, Jesus spoke to his disciples and he told them, he said, "Gather the leftover pieces Don't waste anything. So they gathered what was left over from the 5 barley loaves. They filled 12 baskets with pieces left by those who had eaten. That means 12 baskets were collected as left over. That was how Jesus fed the 5,000 men with 5 barley loaves of bread and 2 fish. We can see the miraculous power of God, that God can do all things, and what God cannot do does not exist. Now, let's watch a video account of how Jesus calmed the storm and how he fed the 5,000. Happy viewing.
That day when evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was, in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him."
Jesus was one of the most famous people in all of Israel. One day, as he was teaching, thousands of people came to listen, hanging on his every word. He spoke and taught in a way that people could understand. There were people from all social classes. Some were Jews, others were Gentiles. Yet each of them found significance in the wisdom with which he taught. Jesus had a lot to say, and later during the day, the crowds became hungry. "Jesus, the people are hungry," his disciples came and told him. "You must send the people away to find a place to stay and find something to eat." Jesus looked at the thousands of people. It was a huge crowd. There were 5,000 men, plus women and children. Then Jesus gave a strange order to his disciples. "You give them something to eat," he commanded them. The disciples were confused. "We don't have any food, and even if we spent all the money we had on food, there still would not be enough." Then Jesus asked them, "What food do you have?" One of his disciples, Andrew, came up to Jesus with a young boy. "This boy has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but that is not enough for all these people." "Have the people sit down," Jesus instructed. The disciples went to work arranging the people into an orderly seating pattern. The young boy watched as Jesus held up his food and thanked God for it. Suddenly, a miraculous sign occurred. After giving thanks, Jesus started handing out the food. The more he handed out, the more food there was. God was multiplying the 5 barley loaves and 2 fishes to be enough to feed 5,000 people. The crowds were amazed. Once again, Jesus' disciples witnessed firsthand the power of the Son of God. Jesus was constantly illustrating and teaching them valuable lessons that would help strengthen their faith. With God, nothing was impossible. Not even turning 2 fishes and 5 loaves of bread into a 5,000-piece lunch. As the disciples scooped up the leftovers, they filled 12 full baskets. This was an undeniable miracle. Who could have such power? Indeed, this Jesus was the Son of God.
Wow, what an interesting and fun-filled class we had today. Hope you enjoyed yourself. Well, I did. You now have a better understanding of how Jesus calmed the storm and how he fed the 5,000. And from the stories, we can say that with God, nothing is impossible. There is nothing too difficult for God to do. All right. See you in our next class. Do well to attempt your quiz and your assignments. Love you there. Bye for now.